After our video from yesterday on mid-fight Splatoon movement that I made with Ren, we wanted to talk a little bit about some specific examples of how this movement plays out in an actual match. We showed some on screen, but we didn't really get a chance to break them down and show how the theory of these different positions that we were talking about, how they would actually be seen in the match. So we've got a few clips, some of which were from that video, and one of which was not, for us to break down the positions of two combatants relative to each other and how they're moving so that you can see who has advantage when more easily in these fights. We'll start with a match that I'm playing here. So I see that there is a player right here in court, and right now I'm safe from them because there's this block over here. And I'm safe from this player for the time being because they're out of range, and I also have some teammates behind me who would probably start shooting at him if he started trying to push in. Notice that he's shooting in this direction, which is pretty far away from me, which probably means that there's someone else that he's worried about. So I'm most worried about this player right here. And I'm throwing this bomb in the hopes that it cuts them off from being able to retreat. And so now I'm in a committed engagement because if they're not going to retreat, then that means they're going to be in range for me to hit them.
Right, and in this position, you can, if you go back just a moment, in this position, when we look at the diagrams, this could potentially be a situation in which you would be at a disadvantage if you fire back right now. Mm-hmm. So I like that you started to move because this guy took initiative fighting you, even though I think he's a little bit out of range, but he took initiative fighting you, so if you fought back here, you would then be at disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. They were moving while I wasn't. So this is kind of position 3 for me. This is they're moving and I'm not. So I don't like that. They're able to get their aim on before I am here. And they also started the fight, like you said, took initiative. Them getting the first shots on also definitely matters. And I want to avoid that if at all possible. So I recognize that I'm not at an advantage and I move. Part of the reason that I jump there is just that there is enemy ink to my left, and I don't want to take the time to paint my feet and swim. I want to be able to continue to return fire while I'm moving, and that's something that jumping can sometimes help you do. Here, since I didn't have to make a quick direction change the entire time I was jumping, it ends up working out. Sometimes that's a bit risky.
And one thing of note too is that we can see the enemy already moving. So just like we mentioned at the end of the last video, the fights that occur are very rarely just a single, like one of the single diagrams that you've seen, like in the quiz. It's always a constant shift between different states, and picking the correct fight is kind of what makes the fights easier for you to win in the long term. So here, the opponent is trying to rotate to take some sort of like positional advantage, but the angle at which it's happening means that Gem's shots aren't so difficult to hit that they just like almost guarantee miss. So Gem is able to land a couple shots.
Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that they're not able to is the level geometry. And that's one of those variables that we tried to kind of control for. But they would love to rotate around me in a circle. But if they do that, they're just going to fall off the ledge here. So they're moving around me in that circle like as much as they possibly can, but it puts them on more of a straight line path to me than they would really like. And it makes it so that it's pretty easy for me to lead my shots. So we've already gone through multiple different shifts in who has initiative here. The opponent started out with initiative. They were moving. I wasn't. They started the fight. I didn't. So then I shifted to the left to try and get initiative back. And then they're shifting to try and take initiative away, but their shift isn't going to do as much because of the position I'm able to take. And that's why I hit these shots. But then they get out of my range, and instead of just standing still and holding down ZR and giving them a position 2, giving them a position where they're moving and I'm not, now I immediately drop into the ink and shift, and they're missing their shots because their shots are harder to hit here.
Right, you just flipped it right back on them. So position 3, I suppose.
And you can see I actually missed the first 2 shots there. That's because I was anticipating them retreating. I was pre-firing them, expecting them to come back sooner, not to fire as many shots as they did at me and miss. And so this was actually a bit predictive, which isn't necessarily ideal. You know, if you predict wrong, then you start missing. I ended up being right. I just, I was timing it incorrectly. That, like, I didn't think that they would take quite as long to start moving backwards as they did. But I did end up eventually getting it right, and they ran into my shots, and that was all I needed to splat them. And I got out of it clean.
Right. One thing of note too is that especially at a top level, a lot of movement is predictive. Like when decision making rather is predictive. So you'll see sometimes top players who just kind of shoot at nothing for a second or two. It's just they're pre-firing where they think the enemy would be before then.
We're going to move on from looking at me to looking at some top level players. The first one we're going to watch is Biscuit, and the second one is Bagel, both players for Starburst, who are some of the most mechanically talented players in all of North America. And they have a couple of clips that we found on Twitter that are really, really good examples of top-level mechanics that show this off at a level that, is obviously well beyond what I am capable of. So 4v4 situation, nobody has an advantage yet, but clearly they're getting ready to hard engage because they're putting a flank around the left-hand side here. And this flank, it has the paint in a line right up next to the wall. It's really important to paint right next to this wall because it gives such a difficult angle for the opponent to hit around the corner and down over the ledge. You really have to be like exposing yourself to the corridor to be able to stop someone from swimming in at this angle. And that's why Biscuit is taking the approach in this way.
There are a couple things to note here. So first, the prerequisite for a play like this being good would be knowing where the enemy is to begin with, and also where their attention is focused. So when you look at the objective right now, purple team's about to take lead. So, and just before, I think if you rewind just a little bit, you'll see that Biscuit here had like LOS of everything in mid, right? So they know that they're fighting for zone right now because they're investing specials into it, etc., right? So pushing left would then be, well, they also have, I don't know who that is up front. I actually didn't notice them in the clip. But
that translates to Beer King.
Nice. But basically they have a reason to push this left side for two reasons in particular. One, if an opponent pushes left, it takes pressure off of the zone, which allows their teammates to like more easily contest it. But two, it's very likely, especially with the information that Biscuit already has, that the enemy is going to be lined up by the time he gets there.
You probably don't want to make this play if you don't know where the ballpoint is, because the ballpoint can just sit up on top of the glass roof there and cover this really well with right side peek and everything. And part of the reason that he's probably taking this route is just that his teammate is already in there, that he's in a position where he can't really assist with that if he stays further back, and that he'll be less predictable coming from the left side than he will coming through mid, where he doesn't have a lot of cover and there's nothing blocking line of sight for the opponents. So he drops down and gets that area painted so he can swim right up to this ledge here. And notice that the killer whale is targeting him, which is going to show the enemy team exactly where he is. And then he loses his teammate over here. So he's the furthest player forward, and he's spotted out here. So he knows that the opponents are going to see him coming. But because he took this angle where he's right up next to the ledge, the one opponent who's in a position to hit this angle is hitting the floor instead of hitting him. If he stood up to fire, he'd be in trouble. But because the opponent is giving themselves away here and not hitting shots, they're effectively stationary relative to his position. And so if he just moves, he can gain initiative.
Right. A big thing, too, is that this is also Tetra. So Biscuit knows that this Tetra just used the last roll, and they can't move anymore. So if he would have fired earlier, then in the time span that I think that was Isabel or someone, like the Tetra was firing on them, they would effectively be at a disadvantage because Tetra would have that like movement advantage that we talked about.
Yeah,
But
if this
because
isn't
they,
new metas comp, I don't know who it is. That's probably Isabel.
yeah, but because this Tetra doesn't have any more rolls, Biscuit knows, okay, they can't move for the next second or so. So now's my chance to just fire as he's strafing to the left.
So Isabel goes down here. And this is totally clean. Biscuit takes no damage because all of the Tetra's shots are missing, and Biscuit only engaged once he knew he was going to hit, and it was against a stationary target. So that player goes down immediately, and now he's traded back for his teammate. But he's still the furthest player forward, and there's still 3 enemy players, one of whom is directly above him and is trying to drop down on him. He recognizes this, and he does what we basically described in example 6, where he circles around the player and gets behind them so that effectively he's got a straight line of fire on that opponent in the direction that they're moving, but they have to do almost a 180 to be able to turn around and get them. So I want to assume that maybe like the ballpoint, either they're just trying to move forward with their team after getting the pick, or they didn't know that the zap was going to be here and were already planning on dropping for another reason. Because this is a little bit dangerous if they just like know that the zap is here and set up. Maybe they think they can get the shots as they fall before Biscuit gets this far in. But Biscuit is moving just a little bit too quickly. And you can see as Biscuit's circling around, can just kind of get behind the ballpoint's line of fire. And then this is also really smart. Biscuit anticipates that the ballpoint is going to compensate for their shots being behind and start accelerating their angle and moving further to the left. So Biscuit crosses it up. Biscuit actually like walks to the right in the direction that the ballpoint was aiming from, so the ballpoint overshoots.
And note too that because the ballpoint is falling, like Jem mentioned, like jumping in the last video. So jumping up and down, falling, it's all the same. You're stuck in that trajectory until you land and you're able to move again. So the ballpoint falling down allows Biscuit to like safely reposition multiple times, and the ballpoint can do nothing but just react to it with its crosshair.
Yep. You're not like Jigglypuff in a Smash game. You can't just rotate yourself in midair easily. Once you launch yourself on a trajectory, drop off a ledge, jump, you're on a pretty set path all the way until you reach the ground. We've taken, I think, 1 shot so far for splatting 2 players. Those are pretty good odds. But now there's another player engaging. It's the 96 gal, so range disadvantage here. Biscuit again moves here right as soon as the shots start coming in. But fortunately for Biscuit, he's able to rotate around the 96 while moving forward enough to get into range here. And so it just takes this one quick move to be able to get in range and get all the shots that they need.
And I wouldn't even chalk this up necessarily to RNG, because if you go back just a little bit, this is immediately after Biscuit decided to strafe to the right. So he strafes to the right, the 96 reacts to that, and then Biscuit cuts back to the left to force him to miss those shots to get in, and also get in range.
Let me back it a little bit further up here. So here's the strafe to the right. And then immediately after the strafe to the right, okay, so the 96 is trying to follow his strafe to the right that he tricked the ballpoint with.
And then 96 itself, as it's firing, has very poor strafe movement, right? So like just walk speed in general. So again, he's effectively standing still relative to how Biscuit sees him.
Yeah. And then at this point, the brush is just distracted by something else and caught in a bunch of enemy ink because Biscuit has drawn enough attention over here on this side that Starburst has become very active on the right side. So now this brush is kind of just easy pickings. They don't even get the chance to return fire. And that's a quad. Got shot, I think, twice, maybe once, and quadded a top-level team just by using flat ground movement to make them miss their shots. Really impressive.
Yeah, and it looks so easy, but there's so much that really like goes on behind the scenes, really, when you think about it.
Right, like breaking it down at this level is something you can only do at 1/4 speed. It's not something that you really have the time to think about super carefully. It's just something that these are habits that you have to have practiced.
Right.
They need to be muscle memory in order to be able to act on them this quickly. It's not reactive. It is reactive, but like your reactions are trained so that they can be faster than you can really cerebrally think about them. So here's what this looked like at full speed. Tetris committed, goes in, they drop. He's managed to make the 96 miss, brushes, easy pickings from there, and they move up. We ended up deciding to split the video in two because the next clip is a lot less about the mid-fight movement that we discussed in the quiz yesterday, where it's assumed that this is flat ground and both combatants are aiming at each other constantly. But it has more to do with cover and level geometry and the way to use those to your advantage. And so since we felt that that was kind of a different topic, we're going to talk about it with a different clip in a different video. So that'll be coming up soon. I'll make a playlist with all of these together because I think this is altogether a pretty good conversation that I had with Ren, and I think it makes a lot of sense to watch it in order. So look for that next one coming soon.